Bosco Bytes, coming to you from Don Bosco Youth Services, Episode 1, Part 3. Today we look at the life of John Baptist Francesia and his great story from a foundry to the Oratory. John Baptist Francesia himself, 16 years later, recalls, he says, "I remember it was 1854. And Don Bosco often told us that whatever happened at the Oratory was permitted by God through the powerful intercession of our Blessed Mother." He says, "I remember I went to call Don Bosco because my mother, who was gravely stricken by cholera, wished to make her confession to Don Bosco. And even before seeing my mother, we were on the way. We crossed the beautiful Basilica of Our Lady of Consolata. Don Bosco stopped. He held my hand and he said, 'If you promise me that when you become a priest, you will preach and propagate devotion to the Blessed Madonna, and I promise you that your mother will be healed.'" John Baptist Francesia writes, he says, "My mother not only recovered but lived for a further 20 years or more." So, how did the little John Baptist Francesia meet Don Bosco? How did he come to know Don Bosco? And why did he put so much trust in him? Here's his story. John Baptist was born on October 3rd, 1838. His grandfather was an ironmonger. His mother ran a stall in the market that sold, among many other things, cotton, wool, and cloth. What did his father do? He just wasted his wife's earnings. 10 years later, we are in 1848. John Baptist Francesia is 10 years old. Things are getting bad. 2 years later, the situation in his home becomes intolerable. And so the whole family moved to Turin to seek their fortune. Little John Baptist Francesia found a job at once at a main foundry at that time. And by the first or second week, he brought home 2 lire a week. Doesn't sound much. That comes to 33 cents a day. The cost of a loaf of bread was 37 cents. It was nothing actually that he really earned, but that was what he brought home. In the course of the few months, John Baptist Francesia made friends with a young carpenter who happened to be his cousin. And so one day, while they were playing all by themselves, his cousin suddenly said, "Do you want to go to Don Bosco?" And I said, "What? To do what?" "Don Bosco is distributing chestnuts." "But who is Don Bosco?" I asked. "He is a great priest. He picks up young boys at feasts and he gives them a good time." And so both of us went there. Don Francesia says, both of us went there. And in that commotion of youngsters running and rushing and playing and singing and dancing, they seemed to be so carefree. He says, I looked in wonder. I held my breath. My mouth was wide open. There were so many boys having a good time. And he watched it all. John Francesia says, we went, and what did I see? I was surprised. He says, I saw so many boys running, singing, dancing, shouting, playing music. all around a priest. I held my breath. Those youngsters were so carefree. They were having a good time, and I watched it all. And he says, literally froze. And I watched it. And in my desire to have a good time, he says, my dizziness disappeared, and I ran into their midst, carefree, to have a good time. The boys at the Oratory had this to say: Don Bosco's system of education was not all fun. That priest taught them that life is not all one big feast. They were more intense moments. And he says, in the midst of all these games and noise and fun, the bell rang, and suddenly everybody was rushing towards the chapel. I wanted to escape. I looked around for the kitchen. I looked for a hiding place. And then I tried to escape, only to find myself caught in the warm embrace of a priest. He stopped me and smiled, and he said, "Would you like to say a few words in my ear?" "Yes, sure." And the young priest said, "But you do not know what I want to say." And I replied, "And why not? I know you want me to make my confession." "Exactly. And what's your name?" And I said, "John Baptist Francesia." "And do you know who I am?" "Certainly, you must be Don Bosco." "I really am Don Bosco, and I really want the good of your soul." For Don Bosco, my dear friends, being reconciled with the Lord was the beginning of a new life. That was the instrument that Don Bosco used to get to know the boys, and thus he was able to help them grow in their Christian life as well. Don Bosco took Francesia by the hand and led him to the chapel with many of his companions. He says, "I remember it was the second Vespers, and I had already forgotten the distribution of chestnuts in the morning. All of a sudden, it was evening, and I was here. It was the time of adoration." He says, "And when I came out, I wanted to meet that priest who had been so attentive to me and who said to me, he was Don Bosco." At the end of the service, the boys came back to the courtyard. They began to play, they began to sing, they began to shout. And he said, in the midst of all this, my eyes were still fixed on Don Bosco, who had spoken to me with such kindness. His loving way of speaking and behaving struck the boys from the streets. That was the way Don Bosco attracted youngsters to him. Perhaps up to that time, no one ever gave them such attention. Not even my own parents, recalls Francesia. And when they had finished their singing, when they had finished everything, Don Bosco would give them each a word in the ear. And I plucked up courage and I came before Don Bosco and I said, "Hi, Don Bosco." And everybody around me laughed. They thought I was mocking Don Bosco, but Don Bosco greeted me very affectionately. Don Bosco's loving kindness was revealed in his availability. That was his second quality. He put his own needs aside and he looked to help others, poor boys like us. Don Bosco never seemed to be tired. Francesia recalls, and we never heard him once say, "Come next time," or "Come later, I am busy now." Francesia recalls, he says, after sitting at the confessional for 10 to 12 hours, if someone happened to come to Don Bosco and pleaded with him to hear his confession, being so tired, Don Bosco never said, "Come tomorrow," never. Don Bosco would instead say, "Now, come now. This is the time to be reconciled with God." Francesia recalls how once when he went to make confession, he said, my conscience disturbed me. There were so many things troubling inside, and I didn't know whether to tell Don Bosco all my sins. And I kept saying to myself, if Don Bosco just tells me, "Francesia, it's okay, go receive Holy Communion," that would be a sign that I should forget my uneasiness and restlessness. And that was just what happened. We go now to 1894. Don Bosco has already passed away in 1888. And Don Bosco's cause of beatification has already been introduced. And Francesia says, "I was called to testify at the process to determine the holiness of Don Bosco." And Francesia says, "From that moment I began to frequent the festive oratory, and 2 years later I was accepted as a student of Don Bosco. Subsequently, I became a cleric. I became a priest of Don Bosco. I always enjoyed a very close relationship with Don Bosco for 38 years." My dear friends, when we look at the story, the encounter that John Baptist Francesia had with Don Bosco, there are 3 things that stand out. 1, joy and cheerfulness. 2, Don Bosco's availability. And 3rd, Don Bosco's educative style that demanded that cheerfulness and joy become a path to sanctity. This was Don Bosco's secret. Don Bosco knew that the young boys wanted to live a life that was carefree. They wanted to have fun. They wanted to play games. They wanted to sing. They wanted to dance. They wanted music. They wanted to be out there in the open, in the countryside, out on picnics. And Don Bosco used all this in his very clever pastoral way to bring them closer to God. This was Don Bosco's path to enable them to become saints. And that is what Don Bosco would also tell Dominic Savio. Cheerfulness is the path to holiness. Don Bosco's availability was there every time, 24/7. My dear friends, my dear Salesian cooperators, my dear past pupils, my dear youngsters, today 24/7 is something we don't like. We want to be available, but available for a certain time. The rest is for me. The rest is me time. For Don Bosco, there was no me time. It was always, my time is for you. My life, I promised my life to give my life for you. 24/7, Don Bosco was available. And finally, we look at Don Bosco's method of using the sacrament of being reconciled with God as a tool to be reconciled with self, with others, and the world. And Don Bosco made saints. Give me souls, take away the rest. That was Don Bosco's motto. That was Don Bosco's secret. My dear friends, here's another story. A story of how one came from a foundry to the oratory, became a Salesian. Not only became a Salesian, but had that privilege to testify at the beatification, to testify to Don Bosco's holiness. What a privilege, and I'm sure he did it with love. May Don Bosco continue to inspire us. May Don Bosco continue to give each one of us the courage to believe in joy and cheerfulness. Today our youngsters are caught up, they are lonely, they are caught up in their devices, in their mobiles, in their gadgets. Their circle of friends is so small. If Don Bosco was here today, he would say, get back to the playground, get back to the countryside, get back to celebrate, to sing, to play, to joy. Get back, do something. Because joy and cheerfulness is something that is there. My dear friends, you are called to be messengers of joy and cheerfulness in the lives of youngsters. You are called to be 24/7 with the young. You are called, like Don Bosco, to make joy and cheerfulness a path to holiness. May God bless you. Thank you.